Okay, so let's go back to the rotations. The first one we have, Chris, I'm going to have you weigh in on all these. We're going to talk about digital terms and systems thinking, and this is our initial task. So this is where I want everybody to chime in. Turn your cameras on and unmute yourself if you want to. You don't have to, but we want everybody involved in these conversations. So the major leadership issue here is getting faculty to be all on the same page. Chris, I'm gonna have you take it from there and sort of like start this conversation or fill in as needed.
Yeah, for sure. So this section is where we want you to definitely hop in, because this is sort of the process for getting there, right? And what we've done in the report that you may or may not have downloaded, but definitely should, is to start thinking about what your pathway might be and could be for how do you get to this place, right? And so this first sort of discussion is relative to systems thinking. And as we all know, in complex change, having a common vocabulary and definition is critical. And systems thinking is one of those things that gets bandied a lot. It's sort of like personalized learning. People use it indiscriminately and with varying and broad definition. And so on the screen right now is a definition of systems thinking, and it is the definition, right? And as we think about this is a management discipline, right? It talks about discrete functions. It talks about interactions between components. And so in terms of first step forward, this is definitely one of those first steps. And so what I'd love to hear from people, because I know from being in school systems and being connected to school systems across the country, systems thinking comes up. It just always does. And sometimes I sit back in those conversations and I go, well, that's an interesting definition. I wonder, So I'm gonna toss that grenade out, and I'm gonna encourage Steve and Drew and everybody else on the call to jump in and think about how do we actually start moving forward the systems level thinking that's going to be required in order to make the next evolutionary step. What do you think? What do you think about that?
I think from one place to start, and I like the idea of finding incremental, like in our zone of proximal development, in our zone of growth. I think that some people can start with secondary. And because it's already systems thinking, you have to put kids into slots and think about a master schedule and all these different things. And TEALS has an interesting model with computer science. They'll deliver you a computer science teacher that teaches right alongside of your computer science teacher that doesn't have some of the technical expertise that person that's joining offers. So that's a way to breach the conversation is within already a pretty functional system that has some of the elements that you want to have conversations about, and then insert that teacher by Zoom, and then see where the next conversation goes. But it's a slow moving train for sure.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, the idea of the big picture view, right? Sometimes we see organizations start to implement, and they implement in a very narrow band. And if there is thought about the lateral connectivity of that, that's great. But every now and then it's so siloed that going system wide creates unanticipated or possibly unforeseen equity issues within the system. And so that's a dangerous, right? That's a dangerous path to tread, even if you're starting small. And like Drew says, start at secondary, start at middle level, and then go the other directions. Having that leadership view, right? The systemic view is one of those critical things. And sometimes we see that and sometimes we don't, but in this instance, for sure, it's necessary. Steve, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what I should say out loud versus what's in my head.
This is a safe space, Steve. It's a safe space.
No, I think the challenge is and I'll speak just from my experience. And I spent 17 years in higher ed before I came to K-12. So I've got kind of that I'm drawing on as well. It's very difficult, I think, for people to understand systems thinking. And how it plays out is people will start with an end result that I need X, and they don't think about the implications and relationships. And that plays out in user frustration and not being able to make the connections between kind of what is happening in a classroom to the classroom next door, to the school, to the and then to the group of schools that comprise a school system. And so I think this is probably something that, we continue to struggle with. And it's great to be able to think about, how do you get people on the same page? I think you almost have to back up and say, how do you get people to understand they're not on the same page? Would be where I would start before even having the conversation about getting on the same page.
Yeah, that's a great point. And in terms of moving a larger system, and you've done that before, it's, what I tend to move back to is taking several steps back to the leadership and the board level, and what learning has to occur at the executive level first before you even start talking about what the building level is going to be, because if you're not square at the top, then that's not going to work, right? It's just not. You're doomed to a slow death, or maybe even a quick death in whatever work it is that you're going to do. And the more people that I talk to about this sort of stuff, that's one of my first questions is, where's your exec team on this? How have they engaged in the learning first as learners? And then where do you go from there? And what's your plan, right? Because this isn't tomorrow. We don't flip a switch on and this thing all of a sudden solves all our ills, and all of a sudden there's not a teacher shortage because we've maximized humans and the machine is doing what machines do. What's the implementation, guys? And sure, this is going to be a long-term change, because we're talking about substantial shifts in thinking and mindset.
Well, that's been my question. I just want to interact real quick and just ask the group how do you see it rolling out in terms of the systematic? What time frame are you looking at? What kind of, how are you getting more on board? Again, like you said, it's got to be something that's kind of, I think, top down. But how do you get that buy-in and this time and when we need it? But we're at a very, kind of a lot of dysfunction in some of the systems that are going on. So.
Yeah.
I just question for others.
Anybody want to jump in on that one? I have some thoughts, of course, but would love to hear from other folks, because that's a fantastic question.
I think it ties back to, I think, what has been underneath the comments so far around we're dealing with humans. And so systems really are about human change, and human change doesn't happen easily, in my experience at least. So how do we create that vision? I think that's a piece of the what you were talking about, the top level administration and board, of how do we vision something different, and then have the capacity to persevere through all of the potholes that are going to be there along the way. So I like the ideas of starting somewhere small. You see in the chat, start with dual credit or CTE and some different ways there. And then if you can demonstrate it works, that's kind of improvement science that you could embed within that process as well. But we're dealing with people whose identity is standing in front of 25 children sitting in rows. And so you're not only changing how they're doing it, but who their identity is in this whole process.
Right. So that's a great point, because that speaks directly to risk, right? And so if there was a group of professionals who is more risk averse than educators, I might go down the path with maybe actuaries. I don't know, but I mean, educators don't like risk, right? It's a big deal to get a teacher into another classroom to start watching practice. That's a risky proposition. And now we're talking about flipping over the table and dumping the Legos out and building something new. That's bananas for some people. That tips them right over the top. And but Patricia, to sort of speak to your comment, it's a vision. You're right. I mean, you've got to set the vision, and you've got to make sure that you're clear all the way through, right? And that red line has to connect all the things. And for us to imagine that we can sort of shoehorn something new into an old box, that's hard. But we all do this, right? I mean, this isn't this shift, a shift of this magnitude. We've made shifts before. As a business, we've made shifts before. We started a personalization shift before the pandemic began, and people actually made the leap, and they started rethinking. I think it was a matter of, I think I mentioned it before in the last conversation, a matter of shifting from I'm planning for teaching versus I'm designing for learning. Let's talk about the learner now, and let's think about systems designed around them and not around solving adult sort of conveniences. And then again, what are the tendrils of that? Where do we go from here, right? If you're implementing a dual language program in your system, where do you start? You start at middle and then go up and down, because then where are the fifth graders coming that are going to go into that system, and where are the eighth graders going that are exiting? Sure, but let's take a look at that and let's draw the map. Not unlike actually drawing the map for student learners, right? As they go along their pathway toward learning and something. That's, it's almost the same. We're just humans, right? I mean, we're just older learners, and we continue to be, hopefully. But yeah, that's hard. That's tough. Anybody else got some thoughts on that?
I guess I can chime in. Something I'm just dealing with right now is trying to even get an understanding of the difference between the stand and deliver class and how an alternative world, a virtual world works. I keep getting asked questions about course load and how the prep time works and how all these other pieces work, because, I love the comment, I have to definitely educate above me. We had to change the superintendent, at the right, so it's trying to get visions aligned, all of those pieces. Any ideas out there on, where to go find some information to help educate those that sit above me, school board members, superintendents, et cetera?
Yeah, go ahead. It looks like there are people willing to speak. I can reference some things, but would love to hear everybody else.
Good luck with superintendents and boards. I think actually some of what was just presented to us this morning would be a good start. So here's a taste. Here's what we're seeing. I think another piece that might be helpful is bringing in people from the workforce who have recently gone remote and their experiences. I think unless we have to start paying attention to what other areas of work are doing so that we can bring that into our systems. But it's not a quick fix. It's not like you're going to train them in. It's planting some seeds, nurturing those seeds, and maybe doing a pilot so that they can see, here's what's happening to our kids, see the light shining in these kids' eyes and the teacher's eyes as they're doing something different.
Yeah, yes, we're attempting to do that. Part of the problem I'm having right now is we're viewed as a competition versus a choice or an option for families. So you're taking students away from us. No, we're keeping them in the district, but we're educating them differently or in a manner that they need. And, before the alt program, before we became a true alt school here, was, we'll just send the kid to you, you figure them out because we don't want them in our class. Well, now they're seeing other students going, hey, because of being able to school at home prior to this, we discovered that that's actually working. So we're in that, I don't know what you want to call it, panic phase. No good change happens without a little pain. So are we in the pain so that we can make the change phase? So I'm just, without trying to ruffle feathers more than I am just by doing what we're doing and trying to meet the needs of students, any information would be helpful that I can present a logical argument, and I'm hoping to use all of the slideshow from this morning as well as to start putting pieces together to put into presentations to help both secondary staff is, believe it or not, the one I'm having the most problem with. So anyway, I would appreciate any insights people have or resources, again, just to move us forward.
Sure. And so what I'm thinking about as I listen is having the vision, right? And so in a system, if I'm a building administrator and I want my system to assimilate a vision that I have, that becomes really difficult, right? I mean, so if you're talking about addressing above you, if that vision's not coming from the superintendent, then or teaching and learning, and whoever your chief academic officer is at that level, if it's not coming from there, then there's a different agenda. You're moving on a different path, and that pathway may be parallel, it may be intersecting, but knowing what that path is, it might not even be clearly articulated. I mean, in my experience, sometimes there's a vision and nobody else knows it, right? There's a handful of people that know exactly where the ship's headed, and it hasn't been articulated down so that I mentioned the red line. That's got to go all the way down to the classroom. It's the old story of the janitor at NASA who's launching a rocket to the moon. It's that same thing. We all need to be talking the same talk. We need to believe in that vision, and so this is directly relative to systems thinking. How do you get the conversation up the levels so that the superintendent is advocating for the change, right? And has the vision and can see where that is, and then is able to articulate that with the executive leadership and the board, and then be able to say, okay, board, this is your piece of that. Here's how you support that. Me as the superintendent, I understand this is my role in how to support that change. My chief academic officer, if you have one, that may be the superintendent, depending on the size of your organization. That person is actually driving the ship. That chief academic officer level person is causing things to move forward and building the relationships with a team or by themselves. They're bringing people in. They're telling the story. They're telling the story over and over and over and over and over again. The story is the same. I watched a colleague of mine working through a progression of executive learning stages, and the vision and the goal was present every time they did that. It was in slide 3 of the deck, and that mission and the goal and the vision was stated and repeated every time they did it. And pretty soon the vocab changes, right? And so the vocabulary is changing. As soon as you know that the vocabulary is changing and people start speaking in similar ways, then you know that some things are being internalized, right? Having a common vocabulary and understanding of where you're going. If you're going to personalized learning, let's identify that. Let's start with that. Let's agree that we have to go to personalized learning for starters. I mean, why are we even doing this? Why not just stay the way we are, right? I mean, all this stuff is a heavy lift, and it's hard, and it hurts, and your brain's going to hurt, and it's going to be long, right? 3 years minimum for a tiny change. And we're talking about a 5-year shift at the very least. And so, yikes, you've got to have the stamina, and it has to survive the people. And so painting that vision means let's talk about it at all of the levels. And then when we think that we're ready to do it as an administrative staff, then we can start talking about it with the lower levels, right? Because if we start coming at the teachers with a disjointed discussion, they're going to be like, nope, thanks. No, thank you. I don't think so. I don't see it. I don't feel it. And if they're not feeling it, they're not going to do it. And that's a bummer, but it's the truth. And as a discipline, we've pulled the rug out from teachers all the time, right? We start something as in a system, and we say it's system wide, and yet we haven't done the systems thinking that makes it system wide. And then all of a sudden it's person based, and the person leaves, and the teachers believed in that. And then all of a sudden that person leaves, the work leaves, and the teachers are like, wait a minute, I just spent 2 years of my life working on that thing that I believed in, and I was all in on that and it was working. And now we're not doing that anymore. What? And so, of course, next time something comes up, they're going to be like, yeah, no, thanks. I'll opt out. No, thank you. Of course, we've seen that, right? We've all experienced that, I'm sure, in the classroom or in some level of a system. It just happens. So, Dan, I would encourage sitting back, preparing a pathway, and it's doodling, right? Find a whiteboard, find a vertical surface and a marker and start drawing. What's the path? Where are we going and why are we going there? And who needs to know what in order to get there, in order to move the thing along. So,
Perfect.
Yeah. Dan, I'd love to chat with you a little bit more on that. This is one of those near and dear things to my heart. And you can tell that I'm a little bit emotional about it because as a former classroom teacher and administrator, and at the central office, seeing stuff come and go is a pain point for me. And I like to try to help people avoid that at all possible. Yep.
Yeah, Chris, I just put up this other thing. So when Dan, you go ahead, but then you guys can go into that and I'm going to mute again. Okay.
We had a systems going, COVID hit, new superintendent came in. So there's a lot of fractured pieces. So I appreciate, going back and, definition of roles again is huge. So I will spend some time at the administrative team level, reintroducing the vocabulary, the vision and the mission again. Had a change of principal at the high school who, we partnered together. So some of my key players, as you said, we discovered this year that we were a lot of one-person systems. The joy of a smaller district, but so yes, and I'm trying before I retire out of here in the next 15 years to not be a one-person system. I want to leave something that is sustainable. So I appreciate some of those great comments. So yes, I've got to go back to re-educate.
Thanks, Dan.